فاذكروني أذكركم واشكروا لي ولا تكفرون আল্লাহ পাক পূর্বতে আলাদা ফরমায়েন আমারে আমার বন্দাকে যদি ইয়াদ করে আমি আল্লাহ আপনার আমার বন্দারে আমি ইয়াদ করি তো এই যে মজমুয়া ফির আল্লাহ পাক পূর্বতে আলাদার কাছে বড় খিমতওয়ালা এই মজমুয়াত যে আমরা ইয়াদ করি আর আল্লাহ কইন আমি ফিরিস্তা আল্লাহর একটা মজমুয়া করিয়া তোমাদের ইয়াদ করব এই সাধনটা এখন আমরা মনোযোগের সাথে এই মজমার খিমত আমরা বুঝি এই মজমার এই পর্যন্ত খিমত করেন আমি আল্লাহ এই মজমারে ফিরিস্তা আল্লাহর মাধ্যমে ইয়াদ করি আল্লাহ এই মজমার বহুত খিমত আমরা ধৈর্য সহকারে আমরা বসার চেষ্টা করি ইনশাআল্লাহ কিসব মাদ্রাজিল্লুর আমি বয়ান করবা সব স্যার বলে এখানে শেষ পর্যন্ত আমরা যাওয়ার চেষ্টা করবা এরপরে বয়ান করবো ওই বক্তব্য নিয়ে আসে সব স্যার বলে ধৈর্যের সাথে বসার চেষ্টা করবো আল্লাহ তাহলে আমরা তৌফিক দেন ইখলাসের সাথে গুনাহ এবং আমল করার আয়
বিসমিল্লাহির রহমানির রহিম আলহামদুলিল্লাহ নাহমাদুহু ওয়া নাস্তাঈনুহু ওয়া নাস্তাগফিরুহু ওয়া নু'মিনু বিহি ওয়া নাতাওয়াক্কালু আলাইহি ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The month which we are currently passing is the third month of the Islamic year, the month of Rabiul Awwal. And this month, the month of Rabiul Awwal, is a very important month. It's a very significant month for Muslims worldwide. And it is significant and it is important because it was in this very month the leader of mankind, Sayyidul Anbiya, the leader of the prophets and the messengers, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, was born. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came, or his prophethood came about in a time where this entire universe was in total darkness. People were involved in immoral acts. People were committing inhumane acts and atrocities on other people. Committing adultery, fornication, these things were considered to be the norm. Thieving, stealing was considered to be acceptable. And even worse, people were even burying their own daughters alive. It's mentioned that the people, the Arabs in particular, they had this shame that their wives had given birth to a daughter. So what would they do? As soon as the daughter would be born, they would get the daughter, they would take her to the jungle, they would take her to the wood, they would dig a pit, they would throw their daughters alive inside that pit, inside her grave. They would then put all the soil and sand and mud over her. She would be crying, she would be screaming, but they would not even think about her cries or her screams. They would then fill the grave and pit until they could not hear her cries and screams anymore. That's how hard their heart was. That's the zulma and the darkness they were living in. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came at that time to take them away from the darkness and into the nur and light of Iman. Now, this topic of the seerah or biography of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a topic which unfortunately we just touch on or talk about during the month of Rabiul Awwal, And the remaining 11 months, no one mentions or talks about the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, talks about the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and what he went through for you and I. And unfortunately what's happening is that the topic of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life and the month of Rabiul Awwal, there's a comparison now between the Quran and the month of Ramadan. What I'm trying to allude to is that nowadays many people, during the month of Ramadan, they will open the Quran, they will read the Quran, they will do 1 or 2 khatams. Then as soon as the month of Ramadan finishes, no one would open the Holy Quran, no one would touch the Holy Quran, no one would even openly look at the Holy Quran until the next month of Ramadan. Then they will open the Quran again, do another khatam. As soon as the month of Ramadan finishes, they'll close the Quran, then they'll leave it closed for another 11 months until the next Ramadan. And unfortunately what's happening is the exact same regarding the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the month of Rabiul Awwal. During the month of Rabiul Awwal, you'll see every week, every weekend, every masjid is doing a talk about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that you should be like this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. They'll mention, touch on the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But as soon as the month of Rabiul Awwal finishes, no one talks or says anything about Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam until the next Rabiul Awwal. Then the next Rabiul Awwal, people again will do their lectures and milad and talk about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then as soon as that month finishes, then that's it. No one will mention anything until the next Rabiul Awwal. However, the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the guidelines which the Sharia has given is that no, you should talk about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam not just in the month of Rabiul Awwal, but every single day, every single week, every single moment in your life should be spent about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how to implement his ways and his sunnah in our life, and not in our life, but also the importance of how we can educate about the sunnah, about the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then implement it into the lives of our daughters, of our sisters, our wives, so that they could live their life according to the sunnah and the ways and best practices of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The seerah or biography is not just restricted to 1 month or 1 moment in the year, but it should be every single day we should talk about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now remember, our only role model as Muslims is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No football players should be made our role models. Ronaldo, Rooney, these people should not be made our role models. Pop stars, singers, they should not be our role models. But our only and exclusive and sole role model should be Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What he said, how we can implement in our life, what he taught, what he preached, what he practiced, how we can then implement it in our life. That is our only role model, and our exclusive role model should be Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, there is one reason I'll mention, a hadith, why we should make Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam our role model. It's mentioned a hadith of Khasa'is al-Kubra, that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born, a voice from the unseen was heard saying that take this child to the east, and then take this child to the west. And then the hadith goes on to say, let the world know about his qualities, let the world know about my beloved. And then the hadith goes on to say that this child, this person who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to be a prophet, he has the same character of Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam. He has the same sacrifice as Sayyiduna Ismail alayhi salam. He has the friendship of Sayyiduna Ibrahim alayhi salam. He has the strength of Sayyiduna Musa alayhi salam. He has the obedience of Sayyiduna Yunus alayhi salam. He has the patience of Sayyiduna Ayyub alayhi salam. he has the piety and taqwa of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. Basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he sent 124,000 prophets in this world. And every single prophet and messenger who Allah sent had a quality, had an attribute. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had every single attribute and quality of the 124,000 prophets sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and even more. That's how blessed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. Every prophet who Allah sent, he had only one quality, one attribute. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had the quality and attribute of every single messenger sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he had even more attributes than that. So this is what makes us obligatory or makes it necessary upon us that why we should follow the sunnah and the ways of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now there are many reasons why we should, love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, try to act upon his sunnah, implement his ways. And we don't have time to mention all of them because there's another part of this particular talk which we're going to touch on about Valentine's Day. But just one reason I'm going to mention here, why we should follow the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now I'll give you a modern day example, and then you'll try to compare it and realize why we should follow the sunnah. Now just imagine you were in a house or in a building, and that building caught fire. Like something happened and the building is started to burn. Now just say for example somebody, he sacrificed his own life to save you. The whole building was in flames, but somebody, a third person who you don't really know him properly, he sacrificed his own life, he went into the building, he managed to save you. Now imagine what you will do for this person. Whenever you see him, you will like hug him, you will kiss him, you will like, say, oh, do you want anything? Do you want a gift? I'll give you this, I'll give you that. Take my house, you could have it. Why? Because you saved my life, you sacrificed your life for me. Now when we look at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did the exact same thing. He sacrificed his life, his wealth, for you and I, for the Muslims and for the generation of Muslims who would come 1400 years and 1500 years later. What the effort Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through, he didn't do it for himself because he was guaranteed Jannah and paradise from before. But the effort and the sacrifice Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through was for you and I. Was so that Islam and the message of Islam, the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can reach us. And I'm just going to very briefly look at what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before he was even born, his father Abdullah had passed away. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to this world as an orphan, as a yatim. Then at the age of 6, his mother Amina passed away, and then at the age of 8, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's grandfather Abdul Muttalib passed away. Now look, in the matter of 8 years, the three closest people in anyone's life, father, mother, grandfather, they're all gone. Now we always talk about, oh well, we've got our children, we've got our wife. I'll tell you one thing, your children will not love you the same way your parents, your dad or your mum loves you. Your wife will not love you the same way your dad or your mum loves you. People say, oh well, my children love me. They don't. There will be many examples in the future where your children will betray that love and they will do something against you. Even sometimes your wife may do that against you. But one person, 2 people who will never do anything harmful against you, that will be your father and your mother. So look, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, matter of 8 years from his birth, his father Abdullah passed away, his mother Amina has also passed away, and his grandfather, i.e. Abdullah's father Abdul Muttalib, has also passed away as well. Thereafter he's in the care of Abu Talib, and then they live, and his days remains in Abu Talib's care and custody until the age of obviously 25, when he then gets married, then all the way until the age of 40, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam receives what we call the first guidance and the first revelation. Now when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the first revelation that you are now the chosen prophet and messenger of Allah, for 3 years, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you cannot openly preach about Islam. You have to secretly preach about Islam. So that's why we see in the very first 3 years, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam only preaching to Islam to his friends, to his family. That's why we see that the very first people to accept Islam was Hazrat Khadija anha, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's wife, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq anhu, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's close friend, Hazrat Ali anhu, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's cousin brother, and Hazrat Ja'far anhu, Hazrat Hamza anhu. Those who were Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's uncle, his cousin brothers, they firstly accepted Islam, because for 3 years Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you cannot openly preach about Islam, it has to be done in secret. Then when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam reaches the age of 43 and the Quranic verse is revealed, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then orders Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you now have to openly preach about Islam. And when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam started openly preaching about Islam, that's when the persecution started. That's when all the atrocities and difficulties started. And what I mean by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam going through difficulty, I don't mean, oh, somebody said something bad at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No. People would throw stones at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. People would throw rocks at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not able to walk the streets of Makkah without someone throwing stones, rubbish, spitting at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's blessed face. Now again, Rasulullah did all this not for himself, but he did it for you and I. He didn't do it for fame. He didn't do it for dunya. He didn't do it for money or for worldly things. But what he did it for, he did it so that Islam could spread to the generations and the people who would come afterwards. And this was the small difficulties Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through. It then escalated into what we call the social boycott, where the people of Makkah got together and they said that we are now going to go against the Muslims and the Sahaba. So for 3 years the Muslims, they weren't living in Makkah anymore, they were now living in a valley outside Makkah, and they were surviving on leaves, they were surviving on grain, and in the case of Hazrat Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas radhiyallahu anhu, he was surviving on shredded camel skin. They didn't have any food for 3 years. Why? Because it got too much that the pagans, they said of Makkah, they said, oh, we don't want the Muslims here, no one is allowed to sell anything to them. It's like a social boycott where no one is allowed to sell anything to them, no one can give them any food. So the Muslims had to live in a valley outside Makkah for 3 years. Remember, for 3 years there was no food. They didn't even have like your chicken or your meat or your rice or your naan or your bread. They didn't eat anything like that. They were just surviving on grains. They were surviving on shredded camel skin. That's what they were eating for 3 years. And then this culminated, this difficulty Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was going through in what we know as Amul Huzn, the year of sorrow, where firstly Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's uncle Abu Talib passed away. Thereafter Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's wife Hazrat Khadija anha passed away. And then there was the incident of Ta'if. Now the Ta'if, believe me, this is what we call like total humiliation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Savagely, brutally being attacked by the people of Ta'if. Mentioning the hadith where Rasulullah, he was being thrown, like left, right and center, stones were coming at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was cuts over his body, there was wound over his body, there was so much blood on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that his entire sandal was soaked in blood. This is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through. For you and I. Again, it's for you and I. It's not for anybody else. It's not for himself. It wasn't for his wife. It wasn't to show the people of Makkah, I'm very brave and this and that. No, it was for you and I, so that the deen, the religion, the faith, the nur of Iman, the nur of Islam can come to you and I 1400, 1500 years later. Now what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is asking for, he's not asking for money. When you may be thinking that when you do a favor for someone, when you sacrifice your life and your wealth, you may be thinking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is asking for money from us. No, he's not asking for money. He's not asking for a share in our business. He's not asking for a share in our house. He doesn't want our homes. He doesn't want our cars. But what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wants is two things. Number one, follow the Quran. And number two, follow his way. Follow the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whatever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did, try to implement in our lives. Whatever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the adab, the sunnahs of eating, drinking, the way to talk to people, the way to, manners, akhlaq, these kind of things, implement it in your life. That's what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wants. And remember, when we talk about implementing the sunnah or the ways of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, don't be like those people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condemned in the Holy Quran. أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ, which means that they only acted upon some of it and not the other. When we talk about following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we mean word for word, action for action, trying to implement the practice and the ways of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in your life. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that, you just act upon one sunnah and then you forget about 100 sunnah. No. It means every single sunnah, every single practice of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in your life. Unfortunately, what happens nowadays is that you see many people, they do what we call external sunnah. So they got, mashallah, big beard. They've got nice jubba. They wear a nice hat, sagri, jubba, everything. But then, when you speak to them, they backbite about someone. They slander about someone. They lie. They deceive. These things. That's not the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is externally, in terms of the beard, the jubba, fair enough, but also internally, making sure that when you speak, you're not lying, you're not deceiving, you're not backbiting, you're not slandering, you're not just like making things about other people. It should be a total acting upon the sunnah, where through actions you're acting upon the sunnah, and also through the heart you're also acting upon the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of the Sahabas and companions of how they acted upon the sunnah. Whenever you want to look at how the deen was followed, how the religion was followed, then look at the Sahabas, look at the companions. Now I'll give you an example of one particular Sahabi in the name of Hazrat Ibn Umar radhiyallahu anhu, a very famous companion, a Sahabi. Many ahadith have been narrated by him. Now he was so staunch in acting upon the sunnah. He strictly acted upon the sunnah. There's a hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, Sunan Abu Dawud. When it's mentioned, these are the words of the hadith, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would pray 2 rakats Fajr Sunnah. And then it's mentioned he would then lie down in the masjid. He would then lie down for a bit, for a few seconds, for a few minutes. And then Hazrat Bilal anhu, who was the muazzin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would then come, wake up Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hazrat Bilal, they would then give the azan, and then they would start the Fajr Jamaat and the Fajr congregation. Now all the scholars agreed that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lying down for a few minutes after Fajr Sunnah, it was done by chance, ittifaqan, meaning that particular night Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spent the whole night in tahajjud. He was a bit tired, so after the Fajr Sunnah, he just lied down for a few minutes and then he woke up. But Hazrat Ibn Umar radhiyallahu anhu, he saw this, he witnessed this. He said that no, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lied down after the 2 rakat Fajr Sunnah, it's then mentioned that every single day thereafter until Hazrat Ibn Umar radhiyallahu anhu passed away, after the 2 rakat Fajr Sunnah, he would lie down for 2-3 minutes. And then he would wake up and then read the Fajr first. Why? Because he saw his Habib, he saw his beloved, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam do that. Many other examples of Ibn Umar radhiyallahu anhu where, again, it's mentioned after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, this is like later on, Hazrat Ibn Umar radhiyallahu anhu, he went for Hajj. And in Hajj, as you know what happens near the Black Stone, there's like a commotion, there's a bit of like, pushing, a bit of hustling, bustling going on there. So what Ibn Umar anhu would do, he would actually get into the middle. He would actually push people so that he can go and kiss the Black Stone. Now the other Sahaba's companions, they were saying to Ibn Umar anhu that, "Oh Ibn Umar, you're pushing people to kiss the Black Stone. This is wrong what you're doing. How can you push people? How can you give taklif and harm to other people by kissing the Black Stone?" So then again Ibn Umar anhu would reply that because I saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam kissing the Black Stone, I am going to go and kiss the Black Stone whilst performing Hajj, irrespective whether people get hurt or not. So what I'm trying to say from these two stories, how staunchly Sayyidina Ibn Umar anhu acted upon the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And again, as I explained before, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what he did for us, he did it for you and I. The least which we can do is, try to be good Muslims, try to implement the ways and practices, the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in our lives. Now moving along and to the topic which we've got for today's program. As I mentioned before, that our religion, our deen is unique. We've got the Quran and we've got the Sunnah, we've got the Hadith. Allah says, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum deenakum," which means that today I have completed or perfected your deen. So we've got the Quran, we've got the Sunnah. There's no need for us to go and look at other people's Sunnahs and ways and try to implement it or put it into practice in our lives. Now this then takes me on to various festivals or celebrations which take place throughout the year. And there is a particular festival or celebration today which is known as Valentine's Day. And I want to give an Islamic perspective of Valentine's Day, what we should do on this particular day. Are we allowed to participate in this particular day? Now before we look at that, we need to cast our mind back many thousands of years ago. Now many thousands of years ago, and probably the younger members of the audience who probably may have read this or may have heard this in school. When you look at the history of Rome, the ancient Rome, you probably may have read or studied that there were two founders of the area of Rome. They were called Romulus and Remus. And you probably may have heard that, well, this is what legends or myths say, that Romulus and Remus, they were suckled by a she-wolf. Now, many centuries ago, there was a particular festival known as Lupercalia. Lupercalia. Now, what would happen? The name of this festival, Lupercalia, is known as the festival or the celebration of wolves. Basically, what they would do is, in that cave where Romulus and Remus were fed by this wolf, they would go to this cave, they would sacrifice dogs, they would sacrifice goats and sheep, and the blood from the sacrifice of the dogs or the sheep, they would then splatter it over young girls. And their intention was that by splattering blood over these young girls, they would now find someone in the future. So it was like a good luck that you are now going to meet a man or a boy in the future, and you're going to marry this man and you're going to live with this person forever and ever. So this was Lupercalia celebration, which would take place on the 15th of February. This was, as I said, many thousands of years ago. If you fast forward it to the year 300, there was a saint in Rome. Now remember, at that time, when Romulus and Remus were the founders of Rome, Rome was like a pagan country. It was like people were worshipping idols, people were doing, inhumane things, as I already explained before, as the case was in Arabia in that time. If you fast forward up to 300, year 300, Rome has now become a Christian country. You've got like Julius Caesar and all of them lot, in charge of Rome. So Rome is now a Christian country, and the Emperor of Rome, he passed a judgment that no soldier is allowed to marry while in command or while in battle. He's not allowed to marry anyone. Now the reason why the emperor made this judgment is because if a soldier was to get married, he's going to go for war, he's going to go for a battle, but his thoughts are going to be for his wives and his children, so he's not going to be concentrating on the battle in hand. So therefore the emperor said, no soldier is allowed to marry. Now when this Saint Valentine heard about the emperor's idea that no soldiers allowed to marry, no young boys, no young girls allowed to marry, he was very, very angry and disheartened that marriage is like a worship. Even in Christianity it's considered very good to get married, and the emperor is kind of stopping these young boys and young girls getting married. So what the Saint Valentine did was, he then in secret got these young soldiers married to young girls. Now when the emperor of Rome found out, he then got hold of Saint Valentine and he then put him into prison. And then he goes on to say that in prison, Saint Valentine, remember he's a priest, and remember priests are not allowed to marry, they're not allowed to fall in love. He in fact actually fell in love with one of the god's daughters. So there's a god there looking after him. His daughter, Saint Valentine, fell in love with. And he then goes on to say that obviously when the time of execution came, because obviously the emperor was going to kill Saint Valentine for going against his command and marrying young boys and girls in his without his consent and in secret. So it's mentioned that when Saint Valentine was killed, then the daughter of the god wrote a letter or put a letter in his cell with the name and he said, "To my Valentine." And then from there you get the Valentine cards and "To my Valentine" and so on and so forth. And this particular execution of Saint Valentine of this priest happened on the 14th of February. Now what happened is that there are two different incidents, but later on it kind of got mixed up together. And people think that Saint Valentine or Valentine's Day is a day of love. It's a day for meeting girls and these kind of things. Now let me explain the Islamic perspective of this particular day. Now there are two reasons why Islam doesn't allow celebrating this particular day. First reason, and there's another reason which I just mentioned about Valentine's Day. Probably seen the picture of Cupid. Cupid is that kind of like a baby-faced angel, and it's got wings. And you probably see them like they have like arrows and so on. Now what people believe in is that whoever you're supposed to marry or whoever you're supposed to fall in love with, Cupid will then strike an arrow at that particular girl. So if Cupid strikes the arrow at a particular girl, that will then mean that you and this particular girl are going to get married and you're going to fall in love with her. So these are three things associated with Valentine's Day. One is the Cupid thing, number two is the Lupercalia, as I explained, and number three about Saint Valentine and how he died because he loved a particular girl and what he did. Now later on I said all these three things got mixed up together and you have Valentine's Day. Now I was explaining that what does Islam say about this particular day. Now when you look at the basis of this day, it actually goes against the teachings of Islam, totally against our beliefs and our aqidah. Now remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has predestined everything before we were even born, before this dunya or this world was created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written that Abdul Rahman is going to live on this earth for 60 years or for 50 years. Or Abdul Rahman is going to get married to this particular woman or this particular girl. Abdul Rahman is going to have this many children, this many boys, this many girls. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed and has judged or mentioned everything many, many years in advance. Hundreds, billions of years ago, before this dunya was even created, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has passed the judgment. Now if we start believing that on Valentine's Day when we meet a girl, that's a sign that Cupid has actually struck an arrow at this particular girl, and we are supposed to get married and we're going to fall in love with each other. These things goes against our belief, because remember, for us to marry someone, for us to fall in love with someone, that is all down to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Cupid doesn't decide who we're going to marry. Cupid doesn't decide who we are going to get married to, how many children are we going to have, how many boys or how many girls we are going to have. So by participating in this particular celebration, there's other wrong things take place as well. There's the free mixing of boys and girls, which are impermissible and unlawful in Islam. Now you get some people, they say, oh well, what's wrong with, say, married couple during this particular day, the husband buying a gift for his wife or vice versa. Now remember, in Islam, we say that love for your wife is not restricted for one day. Islam, the Sharia, says that we should love our wives, our children, but it should be done for 365 days a year, not just for one day. It's not like Mother's Day or Father's Day where you just love your mother for one day and then the remaining days you forget about them, or Father's Day you just love your father or your helpful father for one day and the remaining days you forget about it. No. Similarly, when it comes to Valentine's Day, Islam doesn't say you just love your wife for one day and then the remaining days you then argue with her, you then dispute with her. That's not what Islam says. So Islam says that you should love your parents, you should love your mother, you should love your father, also love your wife, your children, but it should be done every single day. So I'll finish by just mentioning that this is a particular festival which we shouldn't get involved in, because the beliefs or the concept of it doesn't actually coincide with the teachings of the Sharia. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to act on what has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.